Okay, the Senate Subcommittee on Higher Education will come to order. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Creighton.
Here.
Senator Middleton.
Here.
Senator King.
Here.
Senator Springer.
Here.
Senator West.
Here.
The quorum is present.
Okay, members, it's good to see all of you. Before we get started, I know that we've got many members of the public here today in the hearing room and also in our overflow room and on their way to the Capitol to share their opinions. Just for some housekeeping, please make sure that you've registered to testify at the kiosk outside of the hearing room. And please ensure that you have 15 copies of any written testimony that you'd like to submit to the committee with your name on each copy. Again, there's an overflow room available right across the hall in the Senate Finance Hearing Room, E1036. Public testimony will take place at the end of the hearing after all invited testimony is completed on the 3 charges that we're here to study today. All members of the public are expected to limit their public testimony to 2 minutes per person, and to please be respectful of everyone here today throughout the hearing as they need their opportunity to speak as well. Public registration for the hearing today will close. Public testimony registration will close at 3 p.m. So there's plenty of time throughout the day to register to testify. And for those that are traveling to the Capitol, they'll have quite a bit of time to get their registration completed prior to the time that they're called by the chair for their testimony. Please remember this committee is a deliberative body operating under parliamentary rules of decorum. You're invited to attend and observe our proceedings, but it is inappropriate for members of the audience to react or respond unless called upon by the chair to testify. We recognize this is an important hearing for everyone. We're striving for a respectful hearing that gives each witness an opportunity to express his or her views to the committee. The time allotted for each witness is brief due to the overwhelming response to these issues. We're doing our best to accommodate everyone that wants to be heard, and we are certainly very proud of our Texans that come to the Capitol with many, many diverse viewpoints. And as senators here, we want to hear your opinions. But there are also many that wish to testify, and there are so many also watching simulcast at work and at home with busy days, and they're trying to soak in and digest as much of this hearing as possible. And any disruption holds them back as Texans on enjoying and learning from the hearing if it's not kept orderly. I want to thank you in advance for your cooperation on this. Members, we have a full agenda, big issues to discuss, so please keep your comments brief and on topic. Members of the Subcommittee on Higher Education will be given the opportunity to speak and ask questions first, followed by members of the at-large Senate Education Committee. After that, if there's additional time, members who are visiting our committee will also be given time to speak or engage in an exchange with particular witnesses. The topics we're covering today are timely and get to the fundamentals of what we expect from our higher education institutions. Across the nation, we've seen an affront to democracy in different examples and civilized behavior response to the terrorist attacks on October 7th of Israel by the Hamas terrorists. Israel was attacked in the bloodiest onslaught against the Jewish community since the Holocaust. Early that morning, over 1,000 Hamas terrorists mercilessly attacked Israeli communities at the Gaza border. They inflicted unspeakable horrors, murdering, kidnapping, burning innocent victims alive. Senator Phil King invited me and other members of the Senate to an update from the Consul General of Israel late last year here at the Capitol. At that meeting, we met families whose loved ones remain hostages of the barbaric terrorists that killed over 1,200 men, women, and children from Israel. We saw body cam footage from the actual Hamas terrorists entering the homes and celebrating as they brutalized families indiscriminately. Witnessing the horror of October 7th and seeing the anti-Semitic protests on our college campuses have been difficult to reconcile. protesters chanting "Globalize the Intifada" from the river to the sea, mirroring the same rhetoric that fueled the terrorists on October 7th, rhetoric signaling to annihilate Israel by any means necessary. At Columbia University, protesters, many who were not students, took over the campus for months with an encampment, then barricaded themselves inside of a university building and held maintenance staff hostage. At George Washington University, protesters desecrated a statue of President Washington with terrorist symbols, and at UCLA, protesters took over the school library, harassed Jewish students from entering public university property, with chaos erupting through the night. These are just a few examples of the chaos and despicable acts we've seen across the nation, but not here in Texas. I'm grateful to President Hartzell, Chancellor Milliken, Chairman of the Board of Regents Eltife, and the other leaders at the University of Texas for their decisions in preventing these events from repeating here in Austin. I want to also thank the DPS, the governor, and the lieutenant governor for their swift decisions to make sure that all students and all faculty remain safe, as well as any other Texans that chose to exercise their right to free speech. Overall, Texas colleges and universities have handled these protests well and maintained their campuses for the overwhelming majority of students, faculty, and staff that simply wanted to finish their semester, take exams, enjoy their graduation, and walk across campus safely. Campuses that are funded by Texas taxpayers. What we witnessed on college campuses was more than a series of peaceful grassroots protests. It was more than a peaceful demonstration. It was an organized effort to rally comrades from across the state to emulate what was happening at Columbia University and to occupy our campuses and make demands of the taxpayer-funded universities. It was an effort to intimidate Jewish students and faculty. While I personally disagree with pro-Hamas groups and advocacy, I respect everyone's right to protest on campus when they follow the rules. When they incite and encourage danger and or harm to others, Texas students and all Texans and faculty must be kept safe. I also want to mention the legislature has a strong record in defending campus free speech. In 2019, the legislature passed Senate Bill 18 overwhelmingly, which provides robust protections for student and student groups' rights to exercise their free speech rights on campus. That's reflected in the peaceful protests that took place on many college campuses across the state. Members, I look forward to a productive discussion. I appreciate all of you being here today as we do our very important work for the interim, and certainly that's what we're charged with. And with that, I'd like to provide each of you members with an opportunity to bring forward any opening remarks before we call our first panel up, who will give us insight on free speech and some of the anti-Semitism that we saw on our campuses during these protests over the last couple of weeks. Senator King.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to read a little bit of the resolution that the Texas Senate and the Texas House passed one almost at the same hour. We passed it on Monday, October the 9th. And it says, resolved that the Senate of the 88th Texas Legislature third call session, and again, this was passed by the House as well, reaffirm its support and unwavering commitment. This was unanimously voted on by all members of the Senate. Reaffirm its support and unwavering commitment to the welfare, security, and survival of the State of Israel. Recognize Israel's right to decisively and unilaterally in self-defense to protect its citizens. Express its support for Israel's right to pursue without interference or condemnation the elimination of Hamas until Hamas is permanently neutralized and public safety is assured. Convey its most heartfelt condolences to all Israeli victims as well as their families and communities. call upon Texas law enforcement to remain vigilant in protecting Israeli Americans, Jewish Americans, and all supporters of Israel from acts of crime and unlawful discrimination that tend to manifest at such times. Encourage all other American states to likewise condemn Hamas, as well as any official body that refuses to recognize Israel's right to decisively, in self-defense, protect its citizens, and call upon the United States to provide all assistance as may be required to support Israel in its defense against Hamas and all other terrorist organizations. But also just mention, and you covered a little bit of it, Chairman, that in 2017, Texas was one of the first states in the nation to pass an anti-boycott, divestment, and sanction bill. It passed with bipartisan support, and at the time it was the strongest anti-BDS legislation in the nation. In 2021, Texas created the Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission, and with that also adopted into legislation the into state statute the international definition of anti-Semitism, along with all of the examples that come with it, and that's been adopted by many nations around the world as well as other states. Then in 2023, at the recommendation of the Holocaust and Anti-Semitism Commission, having sensed a growing spirit of anti-Semitism on college campuses, the Holocaust Commission requested that the legislature put in place not only a bill prohibiting preventing economic boycotts, as we did in 2017, but adding in a prohibition against academic boycotts. So Texas has a very strong stack of legislation opposing anti-Semitism and supporting Israel from 2017 with the prohibition of economic boycotts, in 2021 in adopting the definition of anti-Semitism into state statute, in 2023 passing legislation prohibiting academic boycotts, and then the governor early this year put out an executive order just reminding all colleges and universities that they are to follow the definition and apply the definition for anti-Semitism that's in state statute. So, you know, I just admire the state of Texas for having been working on these issues for many years, and also just wanted to remind us of the resolution that we unanimously passed in the Senate and that the House also passed just a few days after the incursion by Hamas into Gaza, or into Israel from Gaza. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator King, for a recap on many of those incredibly important bills, and just thank you for your leadership on bringing those forward and being the primary author to stand for Israel, and all of these different issues that we'll talk about today tie back to many of those efforts. You and I have traveled to Israel together for a legislative and a Texas delegation effort to encourage the rest of the nation to follow your lead state by state by state on bringing those bills forward, and it's been very successful. So thank you for all of that and your remarks. Members, any other opening remarks or statements? With that, we will move forward to call our first panel. And panelists, when I call your name, please come forward, take a seat at the table in front of the dais. If you have any written materials to support your remarks, you can submit those to our committee staff up front here, seated at the left and the right of the dais. And at this time, the chair calls Levi Fox, Courtney Toretto, and Stephen Collis. My apologies, Mr. Collis. Yeah, it's probably happened before. Yeah. Appreciate all of you being here. You have 5 minutes each for your remarks and testimony. As a reminder, members of the Subcommittee on Higher Education will be given the opportunity to speak and ask questions first, followed by the members of the at-large Senate Education Committee. And if there's additional time and we have other members visiting, which we don't at this time, they'll also be certainly allowed to participate. And so with that, members, I wanted to also mention as an aside that Dr. Collis is here in his official capacity as a professor from UT School of Law to provide his expertise on First Amendment case law and legislation. He's not here to provide his opinion, so please limit your questions to those that are more technical in nature as to where we are in a series of case law handed down by the Supreme Court, but and the different intersections within the law based on free speech as opposed to how that collides with incitement or limits on free speech and the rights of some that may go beyond those First Amendment protections. But we will ask Dr. Collis for his sort of professional explanation of the subject matter, but not his opinions. And with that, Mr. Fox, we'll begin with you. Please state your name and who you represent for the record.
My name is Levi Fox, and I represent Longhorn Students for Israel. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Go ahead. Appreciate you being here with us today and appreciate your testimony.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to address this committee. My name is Levi Fox. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas, and I'm a student at the University of Texas at Austin. I've grown up Jewish my entire life. I attended a Jewish elementary and a public middle and high school. I've been involved in the Jewish community for years, and last year I had the honor and privilege of representing over 70,000 Jewish teens in over 60 countries as the Teen International President of BBYO. The spirit of serving the Jewish community is something I've carried onto campus, as I've been involved in many Jewish organizations, from Texas Hillel, Chabad, Olami, and Texas API, to recently joining the student board of Longhorn Students for Israel. With these opportunities, I've had the unique perspective to see the university during the last few weeks, and I can say, without a shadow of a doubt, that the future makes me nervous. In April 2017, I sat by Zoli Zamir's bedside at Houston Hospice days before his passing. Zoli, a Holocaust survivor who I'd gotten close to in previous years, had dedicated his life to education, both anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. On his deathbed, I made a solemn promise, that being to continue his mission of education, to work every day and every moment to fight Jew hatred and Holocaust denial wherever and whenever it arises. These last few weeks have been painful, not just because of the rampant spread of Jew hatred spreading around the country and across this state, but because it makes me feel like I failed that promise. It makes me feel like I failed when a fellow student tells me and other Jewish students to, quote, go back to Germany in reference to the Nazi genocide in World War II. It makes me feel like I failed when a UT Austin professor walks up to me and other Jewish students and I directly quote, they'll come after you and put you in the ovens next. This professor, whom I had a conversation with about the vile anti-Semitism myself and others had faced, then had the audacity to go onto an interview following the event, and I directly quote, they're not shouting anything anti-Semitic. They're not harassing anyone. They're standing on the green lawn expressing themselves. When chants for peace and love from Jewish students are met with chants praying for the number of Jews' death everywhere, that's terrifying. When people feel so brazen to call for the death of Jews and not just say it, but to say it with pride, that's terrifying. When these so-called protesters are so deluded that they believe that the death of the Jewish people everywhere will lead to peace, that is terrifying. People ask, how did the Holocaust happen, or claim, relax, Levi, it's America and it's 2024, there won't be a genocide against the Jewish people. Newsflash, Auschwitz wasn't built overnight. It was built as Jew hatred gradually became accepted and when society was desensitized to hate and evil and it became a part of everyday life. Yes, these protests have distracted me and my fellow students. Yes, I've had to stand outside as a proud Jewish student and defend why I have the simple right to live. Yes, I had to cut my study time short during finals. Yes, I'm hurt. Yes, I'm scared. And yes, I am exhausted. These so-called protests, as you mentioned, Senator, are endorsed by groups like Iran, the world's largest sponsor of terrorism, and Hamas, who in their founding charter calls for the death and massacre of Jews around the world. Now, let me be clear, not every person participating in these protests are Jew haters who want to see the destruction of the Jewish people, but every person who wants to see the destruction and murder of the Jewish people is a part of these protests. Universities everywhere are places for learning, growth, and experiences. Recently, we've seen our nation's most prestigious universities become breeding grounds for hate, misinformation, and isolation. Universities are where young people mold themselves to fight the good fight, to learn and to experience, to try and to try and to try again. But at least that's what they used to be. When our students are becoming hateful to anyone, that's a problem. But let me make one thing crystal clear. There will never be a time when I'll be forced to hide my Judaism by delusional, misinformed, terrorist sympathizers whose primary goal is the destruction and murder of the Jewish people. I can make one promise to this committee and to the rest of the world. To all those who stand with the Jewish people and all those who stand against, for those who fight for freedom and justice and those who fight for evil, for all those who have come before me and all those who have come after, I promise that I will always be a proud and outgoing Jew. October 7th hurt bad, yes, but the spirit of the Jewish people is unyielding. The spirit of my Jewish brothers and sisters is strong and only getting stronger. I do want to make a quick thanks to Kevin Eltief, Chairman of the Board of Regents, UT Austin President Jay Hartzell, Governor Greg Abbott, and all of our brave DPS police officers for their continued support of the Jewish community and the safety of all involved in these events. I sit before you, working to fulfill my promise to Uncle Zoli while wearing his tie gifted to me at his funeral. I stand before you, a proud Jew, a proud Texan, and a proud American.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Members will go through the panel, let them complete their testimony, and then we'll have the opportunity to ask the witnesses questions. Ms. Corretto.
Are we ready? Good morning, Chairman and the committee members. My name is Courtney Toretto, and I serve as the Policy Director for the Central Division of the Anti-Defamation League. Since 1913, the mission of ADL has been to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all. Today, ADL is a global leader in fighting anti-Semitism, exposing extremism, delivering anti-bias education, and fighting the spread of hate in our communities and online. Since the horrific and brutal Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel 7 months ago, we at ADL have been tracking an unprecedented spike in anti-Semitism, including on college campuses. ADL recorded 732 campus-based anti-Semitic incidents of the 922 annual total between October 7th and the end of 2023 alone. This was a staggering 1,062% increase over the same period in 2022, when ADL recorded only 62 incidents. On Texas campuses, there was a 109% increase of incidents reported between October 7th and the end of 2023 compared to the entirety of 2022. This spike comes on the heels of ADL tracking record high incidents in the U.S. 2023 was the worst year for anti-Semitic incidents since ADL began recording more than 4 decades ago. There were a total of 8,873 incidents reported across the United States in 2023, an increase of 140% compared to 2022, which was also a record-setting year. Texas ranked 9th in the U.S. with 256 incidents, despite the fact that Jews make up only 0.6% of the total population of our state. Anti-Semitism is more than a form of religious bigotry. In fact, contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism are only occasionally rooted in religious bias. Anti-Semitism can take the form of racialized bigotry, such as swastikas or Nazi salutes, or hatred powered by conspiracy theories, including myths about Jewish power and control. Such anti-Semitic bigotry and conspiracy theories can also target Zionism in Israel and lead to anti-Zionist harassment or discrimination of Jewish students, like we are seeing on campus today, such as excluding Jewish students from campus activities or subjecting them to academic bias based on their actual or perceived identification with Israel. Over the past few weeks, we've watched in dismay as campus life at universities, including UT Austin and Dallas, has been upended by protests that have too often devolved into hateful, anti-Semitic rhetoric and even violence. As we just heard from Levi, many Jewish students report feeling isolated and targeted by these protests. While ADL vehemently supports the right to free speech and peaceful protest, we draw the line when conduct on campus crosses the line into harassment that threatens public safety and the well-being of students. As an organization whose aim is to fight anti-Semitism and hate in all its forms, we know that such behavior puts all students at risk. In response to the current crisis, ADL launched the Not on My Campus campaign, which provides an actionable path forward for colleges and universities and empowers students, parents, alumni, and other stakeholders to come together to call for change. Consistent with the Not on My Campus campaign, ADL has released 6 tangible actions schools can take to counter the increasingly hostile environment for Jewish students on campus, sample language that schools can use to strengthen their codes of conduct, and key guidance for schools to use to respond to encampments and commencement ceremony disruptions. In addition, ADL, alongside Hillel International, the Brandeis Center, and Gibson Dunn LLP, launched a campus anti-Semitism legal line call, a vital lifeline to Jewish students facing discrimination or harassment on campus. As ADL has been urging for months, when students or faculty violate campus policies or the law, there must be clear and immediate consequences. Members of the campus community must understand that while speech may be protected on campus, violations of time, place, and manner restrictions that are often necessary to ensure campus safety are not. And while speech critical of Israel and supportive of the Palestinian cause is protected, threats, intimidation, and harassment are not. Taking over buildings, blocking access to buildings or throughways, and using masking and other tactics to intimidate fellow students and community members is not peaceful protest. Schools must be able to ensure adherence to their own rules, including through clear communication and robust and consistent enforcement of their own policies. I have personally seen and experienced firsthand anti-Semitism on campus around the country and, in fact, globally. It takes very little for a sense of safety on campus as a Jewish student to be harmed, especially when universities aren't equipped on how to handle incidents of anti-Semitism. I know now, working with the leading organization combating anti-Semitism, that educational institutions need the tools, resources, and training to create best practices to combat, counter, and respond to incidents of anti-Semitism or other forms of hate when they occur, to ensure that they create safe learning and living environments for their students. Can I do one more paragraph? Sorry, it's very short. Anti-Semitism has been allowed to escalate for far too long with far too few consequences. ADL's 3 Texas regional offices are working closely with university administrations and Campus Hillel chapters to protect Jewish students during this volatile time, and by doing so, protect the rights of all students to study and thrive in a safe and hate-free environment. I hope you will see ADL as a resource. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Collis.
Thank you, Chairman Creighton and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this important topic. My name is Stephen Collis. I'm a law professor at the University of Texas, Austin, and I'm the faculty director of UT's Beck Lachlan First Amendment Center. The mission of the center is to advance knowledge of First Amendment freedoms and to foster an appreciation of their place in our legal system. I've been asked to testify about 3 things: how free speech law in the United States developed and why, the line between freedom of speech and safety, and then a little bit about SB 18 passed in 2019. So in terms of our free speech law and how it's developed and why, I want to emphasize 2 principles. One is that humanity learned after long sad experience that robust free speech results in the better discovery of truth. And that's captured by this quote from Judge Learned Hand in 1943 in a key opinion right in the midst of World War II. He says, "The First Amendment presupposes that right conclusions are more likely to be gathered out of a multitude of tongues than through any kind of authoritative selection. To many this is and will always be folly, but we have staked upon it our all." The second principle related to free speech is that humanity has learned that robust free speech allows for a flourishing society and reduces conflict. Again, a quote from a Supreme Court justice right in the middle of World War II and the fight with the Nazis. This is from Justice Robert Jackson. He says the following, quote, "Struggles to coerce uniformity of sentiment in support of some end thought essential to their time and country have been waged by many good as well as by evil men. As first and moderate methods to attain unity have failed, those bent on its accomplishment must resort to an ever-increasing severity. As governmental pressure toward unity becomes greater, so strife becomes more bitter as to whose unity it shall be. Those who begin coercive elimination of dissent soon find themselves exterminating dissenters. Compulsory unification of opinion achieves only the unanimity of the graveyard. It seems trite but necessary to say that the First Amendment to our Constitution was designed to avoid these ends by avoiding these beginnings. We apply the limitations of the Constitution with no fear that freedom to be intellectually and spiritually diverse or even contrary will disintegrate the social organization, end quote. Those are some of the underlying values that developed after humanity's long and painful experience of suppressing speech. And what follows are some specifics in how U.S. law tries to protect those values. First off, we have to distinguish between what is speech and not speech. So a few examples of what is not speech: physical harm to body or property, vandalism, including spray painting buildings, blocking roads, blocking access to buildings, barricading oneself into a building. None of those qualify as speech. There is no category of speech in the United States law known as hate speech. That does not exist under our law. As far as public universities go and how they treat speech, government may not compel speech except in certain circumstances, and the different fora doctrine applies on campuses, public campuses. So generally speaking, when we think of public land, we think of 4 types of fora: a traditional public forum, thinking like sidewalks and parks; a designated public forum; a limited public forum; and a non-public forum. For traditional public fora, most speech is allowed and government cannot suppress it. Government cannot engage in content or viewpoint discrimination. Some speech can be forbidden by government. That includes true threats that would raise a reasonable fear of imminent bodily harm, speech that is intended to cause imminent lawless action and is likely to incite such action, speech that is likely to cause panic, and finally, government needs to prevent the heckler's veto, where one person of an audience tries to prevent a speaker from delivering their message. In limited public fora, government can limit content, like the topic that's being discussed, and the participants, such as limiting participants to those affiliated with the university, but it cannot engage in viewpoint discrimination. In any of these fora, government can employ what we call reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. Generally, these must be in pursuit of a substantial government interest, and they should be content and viewpoint neutral. So they should be focused on things like noise restrictions, allowing a university continue to function, monitoring the number of participants for safety reasons. Finally, I'll shift from those are how we address the safety concerns in relation to free speech. I'll shift now to SB 18, passed in 2019. The biggest change for SB 18 that it did was that it required that all outdoor common areas on public campuses be traditional public fora. Prior to that, many universities had their outdoor areas as limited public fora, and only university-affiliated people could use them. SB 18 also put in place requirements for universities for disciplinary policies that they employed when regulating speech. They had requirements for the policies themselves, as well as requirements to how to inform students, faculty, and others about them. In response to SB 18, most universities in Texas did not need to change much. Some, though, did have to change how they designated their public spaces. Most already had disciplinary policies in place that were already in line with SB 18, but they needed to ensure that they were readily available to students and properly communicated to students. And of course, when university actors want to punish speech they don't like, they generally are savvy enough not to do so explicitly. And so it's in their implicit actions where problems can often lie. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions during the Q&A.
Thank you, each of you, for your testimony. Members, the witnesses are available for questions. Senator West.
First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm going to the attorney, okay? What is the most recent Supreme Court case on these issues of free speech?
Probably the 303 Creative versus Elenis case out of Colorado, and that involved the questions of whether or not government could compel speech.
Okay, what about as it relates to universities?
The most recent decision as relates to universities out of the Supreme Court, I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay, but you've kind of covered that in terms of...
Yes. I've covered it in terms of the law that's here.
Okay.
I don't remember the order of dates of all the cases.
Sure, no, I understand that. But I look forward to getting to visit with you here on the sidebar. Okay.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I also had a question. Senator Springer, yeah? Mr. Collis, just on, so like the Chaplinsky case, that just talks about, Supreme Court rulings from the late 60s on free speech and how it intersects with limits on free speech that would be relevant to what we saw on our campuses here in Texas and really across the nation, where obscenities or hate speech or incitement. Incitement is such a broad term, right? And whether or not incitement would be broad in its in how it's projected or very much narrow and directed at certain people or individuals, in whether it's libel, whether it is rhetoric that makes individuals feel unsafe. What's the intersection, in your opinion, on, and I know you're not stating opinions, but as far as how you review the law, what's the intersection between free speech under current case law and limitations on free speech that might be in the incitement category or might be in the just the category of crossing the line into what is dangerous for others?
Well, again, we would use, if a judge were having to look at this and analyze it, they would look at, first off, has there been a true threat communicated to someone that would raise a reasonable fear of imminent bodily harm? So a judge would have to look at all the specifics and facts of a given situation and apply that test of whether or not there's been a true threat communicated to another person that raises reasonable fear of imminent bodily harm. Imminence is important there, so there's a time restriction on that. It has to be something that we think would occur within minutes or hours or at most days. After that, you start to lose that imminence principle. And then, of course, there's the reasonableness component of that. Speech that is intended to cause imminent lawless action and is likely to incite such action is another test that judges would apply. So you can have direct threats, but you can also have speech. If somebody says, everyone storm the library and kill whoever's in there, that would be considered incitement. And something that would be seen to be happening imminently and would be a real threat to students. And so universities can respond to that and can respond accordingly. Again, speech that is likely to cause imminent panic. This is a little bit of a myth, but we often use the example of shouting fire in a crowded theater. But you can see other situations where someone might do something that would cause a stampede or a panic. Universities can take steps to prevent that from happening. Those are the instances primarily where courts are going to look at this and decide whether or not a government actor was properly applying those principles.
Mr. Fox, just remind the committee again about your experience with the professor, and based on what Mr. Collis just explained about First Amendment case law.
Yeah, let me go ahead and...
How do you reconcile the two?
I'm a big Texas boy. I like my fair share of barbecue. So myself, I didn't feel threatened, but I have talked to many other fellow Jewish students, and they heard direct threats or they felt directly threatened. The YouTube professor, I'll repeat it, they'll come after you and put you in the ovens next. And I was also, there are many other, one older gentleman said, how many shekels did I pay the police? I don't like to call that anti-Semitism anymore. I think that's sugarcoating. It's plain Jew hatred. When they state their intent to break policy, when they state their intent to break the law, when they purposely intimidate Jewish students, that's an issue. And I'm not a law expert, but when you say that you're going to break the law, as he just said, there needs to be consequences. And this is a moment in history in which it will be remembered on if this state took action or if it became a bystander.
And the other Jewish students that you spoke to, this is during finals week, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did have to cut my study time short. I remember during the first protest, I was out there about 5 or 6 hours. I did have to skip a class, but then again, I felt this was more important to defend myself as a Jewish student. I mean, I did have to defend, vocally why I have the right to live. But I do know students that had to cut their study time short like me. It was during finals week. seniors that just graduated are the same seniors that graduated during the pandemic, and they didn't get a proper high school graduation, and this was their moment to shine. And it was overshadowed by their last week on campus being filled with violence, hatred towards anybody. It was despicable.
Ms. Toretto, with your experience, your vast experience with the Anti-Defamation League, chants among those that called themselves peaceful protesters, but chants in unison across the nation, including here on the University of Texas campus, chants that matched. The rhetoric was exactly the same in all of these different university situations and outcomes. What does intifada mean to you, and what does the traditional from the river to the sea chant by those that are protesting against the Jewish community and against Israel? What does that mean based on your experience with the Anti-Defamation League?
So we do feel that a lot of students just are unaware of the history of these chants and how they come across and what they actually mean. So from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, or sometimes Palestine will be Arab. It's a cry for Israel not to exist. It's calling for a Palestinian state that extends from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, effectively erasing the entire Jewish state. And what's interesting is actually, according to the House of Representatives, they recently passed some legislation saying that this slogan is anti-Semitic and should be condemned. As for Globalize the Intifada, this chant is a reference to violent Palestinian uprising in Israel that includes indiscriminate violence, acts of terrorism. Thousands of people were killed, Israelis and Palestinians alike. This was a very violent period. So to hear students on campus calling to globalize the Intifada, which is a very painful period of time, is a little bit chilling to the Jewish community. And one that I would like to reference is resistance by any means necessary. And this is, honestly, it's support for terrorism. Saying by any means necessary, especially after October 7th, indicates support, justification, and championing of violence and murder of civilians as a form of so-called resistance. So Hamas's means have included brutal torture and kidnapping of innocents, including babies and the elderly. And we understand protest, we understand speaking to what you care about, but when you say resistance by any means necessary, that goes far beyond protest. Thank you.
And so those from the river to the sea, that rhetoric that was also what the Hamas terrorists on October 7th were saying during their attacks on innocent Israeli citizens. How does it make you feel that those that say they are participating in a peaceful protest and using that rhetoric, when they say that rhetoric does not match the description of how you just defined it based on history?
I think it's important to give people the opportunity. So when I have these conversations with people in my life, I say, hey, just so you are aware, this is the history of what you are chanting. This is not peaceful to the Jewish community. In fact, it's honestly very disconcerting to walk through an area and hear that screamed or chanted. There are other ways to communicate support for a Palestinian cause that doesn't use inflammatory and frankly, a little bit frightening language to the Jewish community. There are other chants that we hear that are a little bit more explicit and a little less under the radar about, we don't want no Zionists here. Palestine is our demand, no peace on stolen land. We don't want no 2 states, we want 48. All these chants are very catchy, and I get why they happen at protests. They're very catchy. However, the effect and the impact they have on other community members should matter. And it doesn't lead to dialogue, it doesn't lead to conversation, it leads to fear and uncertainty and just feeling unsafe. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Mr. Springer.
Thank you. Dr. Collis, as the non-lawyer on the committee here, let me ask maybe a little more layman type of questions. You talked about the judge would look at it and say, is it reasonable that somebody would feel that they were they were being threatened. Help me understand, is that in the eyes of the person who felt that they were and would be a common person would see this, or is there some standard that, or is it just sort of their judgment call in that?
It's their judgment, and I'm smiling because this is a huge source of debate among academics and in the legal community as to, well, who is the reasonable viewpoint? What really counts as a reasonable viewpoint? But the concern, as you might suspect, is the worry is that if somebody is too fragile, is too easily feeling threatened, then even the most modest speech could cause someone to say they were threatened, and then the speaker would be held liable, and we could shut down almost all speech across a wide range of issues, not just when talking about anti-Semitism. So there has to be some kind of reasonableness standard to ensure that when a judge looks at it, they say, well, you may have felt threatened, but that really wasn't reasonable given the circumstances.
Would it be a reasonableness of, and I'll just say a group, and in this case, Jewish students versus Catholic students, that said Catholic students may not feel that, well, that doesn't mean anything to me because they're not Jewish. So does the judge take into effect a reasonableness for that group versus a reasonableness for the entire population?
Yes, I mean, the judge would take into account the entire circumstances, and there's certainly situations where one person might feel threatened where someone else might not, but that could still be within the realm of reasonableness.
Right. Okay. Help me understand, so switching up just a little bit, but still sort of a legal type of deal under the First Amendment rights. Could a professor be terminated for violating maybe a code of conduct within a university on how they will treat students based on just something they said? Would they have a defense in that? That somebody would say, well, that's not the way we want our faculty to treat our students.
Can you clarify based on what the professor said or based on what
I'll
students
probably
said?
just go with what Mr. Fox said. Would a professor that said that to him, and maybe there's other things that were said, would at some level, is there something that could be said that the university says that's just not the way we talk to students and be terminated, or are they protected purely on First Amendment speech because they were either in a classroom or at a protest? Is there a difference between those two?
There is a difference between those two, and I think you'd also have to look at, again, I think applying First Amendment principles, the university would have to really look at these various doctrines I talked about. Was it a true threat to cause imminent harm? Was it something else? Was it a rhetorical point? They would have to really analyze all of that. Certainly, I think professors could be terminated for speech, but universities would be applying these principles as they try to figure out how to navigate these things. There's also many different kinds of professors, so some of it depends on whether it's a professor with tenure, someone without tenure, what their role is on the university, et cetera.
Well, let's take it out of religious context. If a professor went up to a student and says, you're fat and obese and you either need to lose weight or kill yourself. I mean, at some point, look, if I had an employee that worked for me that said it to one of my customers, I'd terminate them on the spot, and I wouldn't, on a First Amendment. I'm trying to figure out, is there a difference because of a tenured professor or the fact they work for a university or something that makes that different?
Tenure can make it different. After that, you apply the same analysis that I've been talking about here as a government actor. Now, government employees, their speech rights are a little bit different, but then it's also different for professors and those who have tenure than what a private employer might do. So a private employer, I think, could probably terminate someone like that without even having to think twice about it because they don't have to worry about the First Amendment, whereas government employers would have to worry about these various First Amendment tests I talked about.
Good.
But there can always be consequences for that behavior, including you're going to get bad student reviews. Administrators are going to look at this and have to analyze it and decide if it's somebody that they want to keep on their faculty.
Okay. I appreciate your insight. Thank you.
I wanted to add to that as well. Does it violate free speech principles to remove protesters for violating campus rules and policies on just maintaining order and safety? So, for instance, no barricades, no occupation zones, no taking over, commandeering of public property, set hours where people can exercise their free speech and their rights. What do you say to that?
As long as the university policies are reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, then it does not violate the First Amendment for the university to enforce them. And the examples you just gave are all generally kind of textbook examples of reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions.
And so, past the point that those campus rules, which are obviously set up to maintain order, a reasonable learning environment, and safety, once those are violated and the line has been crossed, it is no longer a peaceful, organized example of exercising First Amendment rights.
I think that's right. And so at that point, the university can enforce the rules, including by arresting people and escorting them off campus.
Ms. Toretto, according to some of the information you provided in your website, the website for ADL, it says that 73% of Jewish college students surveyed have experienced or witnessed some form of anti-Semitism since the beginning of the 23-24 school year. Is the uptick and the rise in the experience of the Jewish college student in America, is that the uptick in anti-Semitism and their experience, is that something that surprises you? And what's your opinion on what's led to that in recent years?
I'd say the level and just how high the numbers are, I do find that shocking, yes. However, am I surprised that there's an uptick in anti-Semitism when there's a war in the Middle East? Unfortunately not. When I was a student leader on campus many years ago, I was the head of our Israel Society after the Second Lebanon War. And there was a lot of tension on my campus, and there was a lot of vitriol and mistrust and just general lack of common decency to each other. And actually, for myself, we made it our personal mission to try and diffuse the campus. And we tried to have instances of dialogue. And we actually did a lot of dialogue work, which is uncomfortable. But that's not what we're seeing on a lot of college campuses here. If you have Zionist-free zones, or if they won't speak to you because you're Jewish or a Zionist because they don't want to have those difficult conversations, that's not dialogue, that's not improving the situation, that's not de-escalation. And I think we do a real disservice to our students to not emphasize the importance of dialogue. It's an important life skill to have. And so when you have unrest in the Middle East, you do have an increase of anti-Semitism. I think what's a little bit more shocking is just the level and the extremity. And, you know, when we have these anti-Semitic slogans we hear, they're not slogans of peace. It's not chanting for a two-state solution. It's not chanting for let's all figure this out together, let's come together. The boycott, divestment, sanction movement won't even speak to one of the biggest pro-peace movements in Israel because it has Israelis and it has Zionists. And that's not how you find peace. That's not how you create the space to have productive dialogue around peace. And I think we can all do better on that front. And I think there's a real lack of concern sometimes for Jewish students and what they're experiencing on campus, which is why we appreciate y'all having this panel today, because their voices do need to be heard and deserve to be heard, and they deserve to feel safe on campus just like everyone else.
When you see examples like we saw at Columbia University, where the American flag was lowered on the academic building that was commandeered and the Palestinian flag was raised, do you see that as part of a normal example of what is a peaceful protest? Do you see that as anti-Semitism? Or do you see that as just people that hate America exhibiting their First Amendment rights? How do you see that?
I can't speak to the intentions of the people. I think there's a lot of emotions tied to national flags, and I know it was very upsetting for a lot of people to see the American flag lowered. I probably would not classify that necessarily as anti-Semitism. However, it's not productive. What are they trying to accomplish? Is it trying to have a commentary on the war and the situation in the Middle East, or is it trying to intimidate people who might not agree with them? And I think so much of how we view what's happening around college campuses comes down to intent and what is the intent there. And I don't know that. If I were involved in that protest movement, I'd probably say, hey, maybe don't do that. That's not going to get people to support the cause you are supporting. But we are seeing a lot of outside actors behaving in inflammatory ways. So when it comes to the flag and the lowering the flag, I just think they were doing it for a reaction, and it's just.
So go a step further. How do you feel that how effective do you think the demands for divestment were across the different campuses, and that the encampments would not disband or cease to carry out their activities until the university met those demands?
I think that ADL does have a policy of, we don't feel that when you give in to protester demands after they've been violating school policies, it sets a good precedent. Speaking to divestment specifically, ADL does not support divesting from Israel, but this has been an age-old situation on college campus. It was an issue when I was a student as well. And unfortunately, I just think the way the students are going about it is not conducive to their goals of supporting a specific cause.
Members, any questions?
I had one.
Senator Middleton.
Thank you, Chairman. Stephen, this is for you. So, this is more than just a agree, disagree type free speech issue. This is a group of people being targeted because of their faith, right, and their heritage and their culture. Don't you think there should be a higher level of scrutiny for that, especially with, our free speech laws that we're looking at here and some of the ideas being kicked around of how to prevent some of these things happening? But to me, it seems like that level of scrutiny, of course, we got to meet all the normal tests, should be much, much higher when we're dealing with a targeted attack because of someone's faith.
You mean level of scrutiny by the government actors in terms of restricting someone's speech?
Yes, yeah.
Well, I mean, whether I have an opinion on that, I guess, is beside the point. The question is, what does the law say right now? And the law does not change for that. Unless you move it into the realm of, well, no, that wouldn't even change it. So the law doesn't change. What courts have to analyze is, has there been a true threat of imminent bodily harm, and a person reasonably perceives it that way, and is the speech intended to cause imminent lawless action? And that's the standard we apply. That's the standard universities have to apply, public universities, and no one has changed that standard. So I think it's a great point to make, and we can make that argument, and scholars and judges and justices can then debate whether or not there should be a different standard applied based on the motivation of the speaker, but that's not what the law calls for.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm going, is that there's an intersection with religious liberties here as well that we haven't really talked a lot about up to this point. But I think that it does invite more government action here, especially from the legislature, to protect free speech, but also protect religious liberties, where we don't have students or individuals being targeted because of their faith, So I think that it would bring a different standard, and certainly more intervention than maybe would otherwise be allowed from the legislature.
So on that point, I will say, if we're talking about religious liberty law, there's a big debate in that field about how far it extends. But one thing everyone agrees on is that there should not be blatant discrimination and targeting of people because of their religion. So much so that the Supreme Court has even suggested, and I emphasize the word suggested because they weren't exactly clear on this, that if someone is targeted because of their religion, then the government action is not even reviewed by courts using the legal standard called strict scrutiny. It's just invalidated right out of the gate if government is targeting someone because of their religion. Now, of course, that scenario is different here because we're not talking about government actors targeting people because of their religion. We're talking about some citizens targeting other citizens because of their religion, which is a little bit different factual scenario. But you're right, under the free exercise clause, when government targets someone because of their religion, pretty much everyone agrees the government simply can't do that unless it meets the absolute highest of standards.
Right, and we are talking about government today. I mean, Levi, you're a University of Texas at Austin student. These are issues that have happened on our public university campuses, so that is government. And I wanted to ask, I think Courtney may be the right person to ask, and I've seen this out there somewhere, the number of or percentage of Jewish students that feel less safe on our public, well, it doesn't have to be any public, our university campuses after October 7th, and then, of course, the reaction that we're seeing with these protests. I vaguely recall seeing something that said 60-something% of Jewish students feel less safe on our university campuses.
I can get you the exact number. I don't have that in front of me, but it was a significant number, and I think as Levi spoke to the Jewish experience so eloquently, Jewish students in general, how many Jewish students have taken off Stars of David's or religious identification or taken off mezuzahs from their doors? There's a sense of unease permeating Jewish students across the country, and it's a significant number, so I will get that number for you. But it's impactful and it's unfortunate, and that's what we're fighting to try and improve for Jewish students.
Wow, so literally they are hiding their faith for fear of adverse action and their personal safety.
Some definitely are. You can probably
And
speak to that a
Levi,
little bit
I guess
better.
that's a question for you. Have you seen kind of that similar, I guess, number where, we're seeing a supermajority, of Jewish students feel less safe? Is that
Absolutely.
that match with what you're saying?
Absolutely. I mean, I lost friends in the October 7th massacre, and since then, I have a Magen David, my Star of David, around my neck, and I've also worn, the hostage dog tags to bring them home. I've been wearing an Israeli flag pin on my backpack, and one of my Jewish friends has told me that's putting a target on your back. I'm never going to be scared. I've always been a proud Jew. I will always be a proud Jew. I'm not going to be scared by delusional terrorist sympathizers, like I said. But I have seen firsthand Jewish students taking off yarmulkes or hiding their Stars of David that they hang around their neck, or skipping Hillel Shabbat because it's been a tough week and I don't want to be seen walking into that building because that puts a target on my back. When students are scared, whether they're Jewish or not, whatever they believe, if they're scared to express themselves on a university campus, which are supposed to be environments for learning, growth, molding yourself to be a functioning adult, that is a catastrophic failure of not just the university, but society in general. I wouldn't even argue if it's on campus. If anybody in this great nation is afraid to express themselves, that is a failure on all of us. And it's horrifying to see my friends be scared to be Jewish. I never thought I would see that. You have Holocaust survivors that never thought in their lifetime they would be taken to Auschwitz, be liberated, and then see that same treatment begin again in the United States of America. That's horrifying. And I respect the ADA. I love them. I worked with them during my time at BBYO, and I continue to work with them. But I didn't fill out that form. I would say a large number of Jewish students haven't filled out that form, and I would guess whatever statistics they have, there are more Jewish students that are scared. I would say there are students that are scared to fill out that form for it being leaked with their name on it, if it has their name on it. I can't blame the Jewish students either. And I will fiercely protect them, and I will be a proud Jew. But it's terrifying to see my fellow Jewish students be scared to be themselves.
So you think that number is actually higher based on that?
100%. I would bet a lot of money on it, that the number of Jewish people that are scared after October 7th or after these protests are much higher than any poll or estimate.
Well, we're with you. It is un-Texan and un-American to have to hide your faith.
I appreciate
We don't
that.
do that here. So thank you for standing up and being bold and courageous. And on that professor, was that a UT Austin professor that you mentioned that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he was.
Could you reveal who that is?
I do have his name on my phone. I don't know if I want to reveal it right now at this moment, but I'd be happy to give that name to you in
I'm
private.
curious which department. this professor-
History.
So, history.
History.
Wow.
Yeah,
There you go.
a little bit,
Okay. Yeah.
ironic there. I mean, I'd also like to say that we're in the age of misinformation. It's so easy to see a graphic on Instagram and think you know everything about the over 3,000 years of history in that small piece of land in the Middle East, but you're not. None of us are experts on the Middle East, let alone Israel. The ability to share misinformation so quickly. I mean, the UN just a couple days ago released updated statistics on the number of civilian deaths in Gaza. Of course, every civilian death is a travesty. But when you have so much misinformation flying around, let alone from a terrorist group like Hamas, it becomes so difficult to fight misinformation. And that is what is terrifying, not just me, but a lot of Jewish students, but a lot of experts as well, as it's so easy to spread information now on social media. I mean, I think it takes 2 clicks on Instagram to share a post to your story. So it's an interesting time that we're in, and it is scary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Middleton. Senator King.
Levi, I know you're uncomfortable with it, but before you leave today, would you give me the name of that professor?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And I was also going to ask, did you report that incident to the university?
I reported to our club leadership, and I believe they reported it. I don't have an update for you. I wasn't given an update. I'd also like to say, to go back to the question on hiding your Jewish identity, during one of the protests, we were asked by university officials, if you are a Jewish student or you're a pro-Israeli student, please leave the protest for your own safety. I didn't leave, but a large group of students did leave.
And so, Mr. Fox, when later when we have witnesses that make an impassioned plea during their testimony to the committee that they were just participating in a peaceful protest, exercising their rights to free speech under the First Amendment, speaking out against genocide and participating in a very peaceful, just anti-war sentiment, that's part of their rights as an American.
Mm-hmm.
To bring that type of viewpoint forward. So and where else, but where better but a college campus where students that are learning and engaged and just finding out who they are as a person, participating in their civic duty to make America and the world a better place. What would you say when the committee is hearing that testimony as they sort of reshape and recalibrate the frame of where we have started out in this hearing with what we define as anti-Semitic behavior?
I am a fierce protector and advocate of the First Amendment. I believe that every single person in this country, and ideally around the world, has the right to express themselves and their beliefs in a peaceful manner. During the first big protest, I think it was on a Wednesday, I saw a police officer. He was doing their riot formation. And then about 10 minutes later, he was getting patched up with gauze because he'd been punched in the face. That's not a peaceful protest. It's not a peaceful protest when you're violating policy. It's not a peaceful protest when you're breaking the law, when you're inciting violence. That's not peaceful. And I will say, I do believe that a vast majority of those protesters are probably not themselves anti-Jewish, but they have affiliated themselves with a group, with an organization endorsed by Hamas, endorsed by Iran. Whether or not they know what they're saying or not, they are saying it. whether or not you know the true meaning behind From the River to the Sea, whether or not you know the true definition of what an intifada is, which if there was an intifada on campus, buses would be blown up, there would be shootings in every classroom. I don't think a lot of them know what that means. When you put yourself with a group, with an organization that is anti-Semitic, yourself becomes anti-Semitic. It's the same idea if a politician was endorsed by a hate group. I would say that they're pretty hateful because I don't think hate groups are focused on economic policy. They're usually focused on hating someone. But a lot of the people that attended those protests, their goal was to be peaceful. But when you have instigators, when you have people that turn it violent, when you have people that turn it and focus it on Jew hatred, that is where the line needs to be drawn. Every single person in this great state and in this great country has the right to express themselves, but when it becomes violent, that is not allowed. And I do believe, and I know that there were a number of Jewish students that were a part of the pro-Palestine protest. But I will say, when you affiliate yourselves with anti-Semites, you become an anti-Semite. I'm not calling those Jews anti-Semites, but I am saying that when you affiliate with a group that hates Jews, what does that make you?
So is it fair to say that part of your answer certainly reflects that if you show up with the intention to be a part of a peaceful protest, but then there is incitement, there is violent rhetoric referring to, you mentioned intifada, which in recent years, in the last two intifadas, there were suicide bombers that blew up cars that detonated those suicide bombs on a campus in a student recreation center that killed Jewish students and Americans. And so when that's being chanted on a university campus, and we're talking about a balance and a check on free speech, crossing that line into incitement and dangerous rhetoric, which is a clear limitation under Supreme Court holdings. Even if you showed up at that, what you thought to be a peaceful exercise of First Amendment rights, once that line is crossed and you remain there in the encampment, in the occupation zone, you're part of the incitement.
Yes, without a shadow of a doubt, yes.
Thank you.
Like I said, when you're endorsed by a terrorist group who in their founding charter calls for the death of Jews around the world, are you supporting that? Because if you don't, why are you there? Whether or not you realize it or not, whether or not you're so misinformed, whether or not you truly understand the history, whether or not you truly understand the true meaning of these, and I understand that they're catchy. They're really catchy, and I will say. But when you chant them, when you affiliate yourself with those groups, and when you stay there after it has become violent, and you yourself, if you have become violent, you should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. So I will see it.
And last question, do you think that it is solely peaceful intentions when baseball-sized stones are hidden at different vantage points around a campus during what is called a peaceful protest and an encampment occupation zone on the South Lawn?
If their intent is to assault civilians or police officers, that's not a peaceful protest. And I do believe that an email was sent out by the dean of the Macomb School of Business following one of the last protests I was at, saying that part of the dean of student staff did try to go in and stop the encampment, but they were verbally and I believe physically assaulted. That's not peaceful. So it's as simple as that. When you're going to throw rocks at civilians and police officers, that is not peaceful.
Appreciate your testimony,
Thank you.
Mr. Fox. Members, any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Menendez,
Thank
thank you for being with us today, and it's good to see you, and appreciate your being involved in the committee as you always are. Coming from the At-Large Education Committee, it's our intention for the Higher Education Subcommittee to be very welcoming to other members, and we appreciate a long history of support for higher ed, and
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
appreciate your time here today.
Absolutely. And for the members of this committee are well aware, before our panel and the folks in the audience, I authored legislation both on bullying, anti-bullying, and most recently on asking the state to create Holocaust mandatory, we created a Holocaust Remembrance Week. The next step, and I think based on this committee, you probably will see that, will make it expand the amount of TEKS about the Holocaust education. See, one of the issues that you have is that a lot of people deny that the Holocaust ever existed, and that's one issue. This question is more for Professor Collis, is it? Professor, you know, there have been protests, as you're well aware, across the nation, correct? And not all of these protests have had police presence, have they? And not all of them have been violent, correct?
Correct.
My question is, do you know, as you are obviously the expert in First Amendment, what were the actions, were you consulted on the actions that necessitated the police response at UT? Were you aware, or?
No, I was not involved at all.
My
I'm not
understanding.
an administrator in any ways.
Understood. My understanding is that the, and I have to say that I agree completely that if they're going to be a peaceful protest, they must maintain a peacefulness. But my understanding is that there was a letter, and I guess I'll save this question for Chancellor Milliken from UT Dean of Students, notifying that they could not hold a protest on campus. And so I'm going to ask if that was ahead of time, and the reason why, because then how do you know if it's going to be a peaceful protest or not, and how are you stifling? Because I have to agree with everything that's been said on this dais, that everyone has a right to speak their mind. And I recall correctly the quote from our colleague: "It is critical that free speech is protected even if the speech in question is unpopular or contentious." And that was Senator Huffman when she was laying out SB 18. So I know that we had protests in San Antonio without any violence, without any police presence. In retrospect, Professor, do you think the reactions from the students could have been the same, worse, or better if the administrator had made a different decision? Well, that's your opinion. My concern is that did lining up a large line from the photographs that I saw of police in riot gear, did that not maybe raise the temperature rather than disperse, lower the temperature of the situation? And so I can't ask you your opinion based on the chairman's instructions, so we're gonna shy away from that for now. Just concerned, I can understand the need not to have violent people of any kind, but I just hope, Mr. Chairman and members, of that as we stand united to defend the rights of students to feel safe, in this case, students of Jewish descent, that we recall these things when we have other students being marginalized and being ostracized, whether they're of immigrant descent or if they're LGBTQ community or others. We just need to be cautious that we apply the same level of protection across the board. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Dr. Collis, did you have something else to add to Senator Menendez's comments?
No.
Members, any other questions? We appreciate your time. Thank you, each of you.
Thank you.
I know we have a representative from DPS here today as a resource for the committee. Senator King, did you have any questions of our DPS resource? If we could ask them to come forward.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Colonel Martin Freeman. How are you?
Chairman, Vice Chair, members, my name is Freeman Martin with the...
Freeman Martin, excuse me, sir.
Yes, sir, Freeman Martin, Deputy Director with the Department of Public Safety, and I don't have any prepared remarks, but I'm here as a resource witness and answer any questions you might have.
Oh, thank
Go
you,
ahead,
Chairman.
Senator King.
Yeah, thank you. And Colonel, thanks for being here today. Looked like the UT, from what I read anyway, that the graduations all went off without a hitch. which is wonderful. And I can't help but think that had a lot to do with how DPS had handled the protests. As you think back on it, kind of after action report time, do you feel that the DPS was prepared to handle protests of that size? It seems like you were mobilized on pretty short notice, but do you feel like you were prepared and equipped to handle protests of that nature?
Yes, sir. Within the Department of Public Safety, we have the Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division, so our analysts that monitor this stuff statewide. And we also have the Office of Homeland Security. And so we're constantly monitoring threats nationwide, communicating with our fusion center, with the other fusion centers, and our federal partners. So we have a pretty good grasp on especially the larger protests. At this same time, there were protests in Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio. We prepare for all of them, but we look at the intelligence and let that dictate our response. I heard the senator talk about in San Antonio with no violence. We were prepared for that also. At the same time, there was a call to block interstate highways in Houston and the same thing in the San Antonio area. So we had deployed additional resources to prepare for that. It turned out we had a small protest at UTSA that was uneventful, and then we had a road blocked, I believe, going into the Valero there in San Antonio that we responded to, but a lot less resources deployed to them just based on the intelligence that we had.
And I know there were a number of people arrested. Approximately how many were arrested, and what were the general charges?
We had, on Wednesday, April the 24th, there were 55 arrests on the University of Texas campus. And then on Monday, the 29th, there were 79 arrests. The majority of those were blocking passageways or criminal trespass.
Okay. And were there any officers injured?
And Mr. Barton, if you could speak closer into the microphone.
Sure. We had some minor injuries, and then it was more damage to property. We had some tires slashed on SWAT and patrol vehicles. We had these arrests were, and I will say that we assisted the University of Texas Police Department with this at their request. So they were the affiant on all these arrests. There were some one-offs, and then there's some others that we're still looking at. For example, there were several incidents where we had troopers that we had people reach in trying to grab their weapons, their service weapons. We had a few minor injuries, and then we had the vandalism to our vehicles, and that we're still looking at those and trying to go back and identify.
Sure. The people you arrested, were there any weapons found?
I believe there was one early on at the beginning of the protest when we were walking the campus. We found a stockpile of rocks and bricks that had been strategically placed, and we removed those. I believe pepper spray, knives, one handgun.
Were found on the arrested
Yes, sir.
folks? Now, of those who were arrested, how many of them were students?
On the
Or had some affiliation as an employee or student of the university?
On the 24th, there were 55 arrests, and 26 of those were not affiliated with the university. On Monday, the 29th of April, there were 79 arrests, and 35 of them were not affiliated with the university, according to the University of Texas Police Department.
And what about prosecution? So they were arrested, they were taken to, I guess, the Austin City Jail or the county jail, and charges were filed for trespass or, I guess in one case, weapons, whatever it may have been. Were those prosecuted? Do you know, has the county attorney or district attorney accepted charges on those for prosecution?
You know, the University of Texas Police Department is the affiant on those, and it's my understanding that the first arrest, the 55 on Wednesday, the 24th, were dismissed.
When you say dismissed by who? By the prosecuting authority or by the police?
Yes, either prosecuting authority.
That would be the county attorney?
It'd be the county attorney or the magistrate.
Okay. So when they were brought before a magistrate, either the magistrate refused to accept the charge or the county attorney announced to the magistrate that they were not going to seek prosecution?
Yes, sir. And I can get that information and get it to you. I didn't have time to get it this morning.
Okay. What about the next day?
On Monday, the 29th, the 79 arrest, I believe, the University of Texas Police Department worked with the prosecutors on those to address some issues they had with probable cause affidavits and how they were written. And I believe those cases are still pending. I'm not aware of how many have been dismissed or the status of those.
And the ones that were initially dismissed, those can be refiled, and a prosecutor could decide to go ahead and take those up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And just one last question. Thank you, Chairman, for the time. As you look at the response that the DPS made, were there any tools? I mean, what did you need that you didn't have to properly respond to the protests?
I would say we never have enough resources, and there was some criticism for how many officers we had present at the University of Texas. We've unfortunately have gotten a lot of experience with protest here at the Capitol, and based on the intelligence and the intent of the organizers, we work very closely with the organizers. So we try to provide them a safe place to demonstrate and protest. But with that, people lose sight of there's counter-protest that we're extremely concerned of. So a lot of times we're there protecting the protesters from the counter-protesters, but also from disrupting right here in the Capitol. We have protests here every day, and they're allowed to protest. But if you start plugging in speakers and amplifiers, and we had this conversation here recently, it doesn't matter what your cause is, you're going to be asked to leave if you're disrupting employees, staff, customers, or whatever the case may be. You're going to be asked to leave, and if you don't leave, you're going to be arrested for criminal trespass. So a lot of these, the University of Texas, we were a lot heavier than we were at the University of North Texas or UT Dallas or Texas Tech or UTSA, just based on the intelligence that we had and their intentions of wanting to take over and occupy and disrupt. It's our experience that overwhelming force allows us to use less force. If you see these large crowds, and at the University of Texas, there were a lot of people there that were just observers. They're just students. They came out to see what's going on. Within that, you have some real agitators in there that this might not even be their cause. They're anti-government. We see them frequently at other protests that have nothing to do with this Israeli-Hamas conflict. They're just agitators, and they show up to create havoc and disrupt and cause issues. So having a large force there, having our mounted unit to be able to separate when we make an arrest, it prevents us. We're allowed to use less force to effect an arrest, rather than having less officers trying to arrest somebody with outside agitators jumping in and grabbing at service weapons.
That's great. That's a great point. One last question for real. It's the last question. Were any of the people double arrests? In other words, the ones that were not prosecuted, did you end up arresting any of those same people on the following Monday?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Middleton.
Quick question. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Freeman, for coming here today. We've talked a lot about something similar that happened here at the Capitol in, I believe, May 31st of 2020, where we had, I think it was 7 state troopers injured, and it was not a peaceful protest. It was violent, obviously, and this building was spray painted, monuments were pushed over. Just to make it clear, nobody's been prosecuted for that still, right, in Travis County?
That's correct. You're talking about the summer of 2020?
Yes,
Yes,
yeah. And so is that your expectation here as well with these 55 plus 79 arrests? I mean, some are misdemeanor county attorney, some are district attorney felony, so 2 different offices, obviously, but it would seem that same thing's about to happen.
Yes, sir.
here.
That's been our experience, yes.
Yeah. And last question, have you seen evidence that these protests, both in 2020 and this time here on UT campus, were either somehow organized or funded out of state? They're
well funded. How they're funded is there's a lot of intelligence. I can tell you that people are dropping pallets of Gatorade and water and delivering pizzas. When you research some of the information of how that was paid for, it'll come back to some high-level executive at Amazon out of Florida. Of course, they will make the argument that these are peaceful protesters and they want to make sure they're hydrated. But the organizers are, we see some of the same organizers, and we don't know how they're funded.
So it would be because of our experience, what happened here at the Capitol with violent rioters not being prosecuted, that would really leave it, to the university and the legislature to do something about
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
And we're in communication with our federal counterparts. So we have a lot of the same concerns. I mentioned we have the Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division as well as the Homeland Security Office. The threat, without question, it doesn't matter what agency you work for, has never been higher. ADL was up here talking about specific to anti-Semitism and 140% increase from 2022 to 2023. But that's across the board with public safety and Homeland Security threats at the current moment. So there's a lot of work to do, and we look at these prosecutions and targeting individuals and has really good recent conversations with our U.S. Attorney's Office here in the Austin area. But concerning the protest, when you look at criminal trespass arrests and some of these misdemeanors, that's one thing. But when you have people attack a police officer, one that comes to mind is right here at the Capitol. An elderly black state trooper in uniform attacked by a bunch of young white thugs. It's concerning when that's not prosecuted, when it's on video. There's no question as to the probable cause or the elements of the offense or what happened in that situation. So it is a concern.
And there's been no justice for that state trooper, unfortunately, which is sad. Thank you.
Senator West.
I just want to follow up on a couple of questions I think it was asked by Senator. As it relates to the cases that were dismissed, how familiar are you with why they were dismissed, the reason?
Sir, I haven't looked at it in a long time, so I looked at it this morning. I was not aware that I was going to testify, but I have that information. I've got a spreadsheet of every offense, what was filed, and the date of dismissal and the reason for.
It was my understanding that the reason that most of them were criminal trespass cases.
Oh, you're talking, okay, yes, sir, the recent. I have not seen the most recent. Like I said, the University of Texas Police Department was defiant, so I have the names and the charges, but I don't have the disposition of any of those.
Okay, so you're not very familiar with why the judge dismissed those cases?
No, sir.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Freeman, first of all, thank you for your service. You've got a long history, and we've worked together on lots of things in the past. The case you just mentioned is unexcusable. If you've got video of a criminal punching a law enforcement officer, they should be prosecuted. End of story. My concern, and I understand you just said you weren't aware of the fact you were going to testify, so I'm not going to ask you if you can answer the question now, but if you could bring us back. My understanding is any time that law enforcement uses some type of force on civilians, that there's some report of some kind. I saw a video of a news video photographer being yanked from behind by one of your officers down to the ground. It concerned me. It disturbed me. It made me ask the question, why? I'm not going to jump to any conclusions, but I do want to know if you could help me find out the why. I've heard of an elderly journalist from Fort Worth who was also injured. I don't know how it happened. I'd like to know. I appreciate the very difficult role that you have and that your men and women have to keep us all safe. Just want to make sure that it's done in a way that everyone feels like they're on the sidelines making sure that everyone's safe and everyone has a right to express themselves without crossing those lines. And so I appreciate the word. I just need to know, why did that happen? It seemed like it was an excessive use of force in my very limited view. I only saw a small clip of the video that occurred, but I don't understand why a video photographer would be pulled down from behind while having the camera in their arms. So I think you can understand my concern.
Yes, sir, and I have seen that clip, and I read affidavits from officers that were present, and the one corporal in particular that was behind the officer that was pushed, and also videos from the photographer earlier in the day where he was agitated and confronting state troopers. So put all that together into context, breaking down frame by frame. The special agents that investigated that believe that clearly he committed an offense. They met with the county attorney's office, and that case is pending as far as, and there's multiple videos of that same incident. I saw some that you don't see what happens, you just see them get thrown backwards, and I've seen other angles that are broke down, and we'd be happy to share that with you.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Colonel.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Members, any other questions? Freeman, thank you for your testimony. We certainly appreciate the officers being present for the safety of all of those involved. We saw examples at UCLA where officers were not deployed, and there was, fighting and injury through the night from both sides of the issue, and just outright chaos and lawlessness. And so, yes, there are some that feel that officers being present and deployed, that's an ominous situation, and it triggers certain emotions. But at the end of the day, the effort was to keep everyone safe and to provide order, and we appreciate
Yes, sir. The only thing I would
everything
add,
DPS was doing.
we collect a lot of intelligence and we share it with local agencies, and we try to support them. University of Texas Police Department does a really good job, but I don't think there's an agency in Texas that is properly staffed, police department, sheriff's department, or university police. We bring in resources. A lot of times you might not see them, but we're prepared for the worst and hope for the best. And so this is one situation where we actually had to deploy them. There were many others that you just didn't see, but they were there, and we're monitoring, and we're ready to respond to protect both sides of the issue.
Well, DPS, working with the campus police department, they did an excellent job, sort of in interoperability and working together, and just appreciate always what your team provides. So, members, with that, we appreciate the insightful and respectful conversation. We're going to take a short break before moving on in our agenda towards the implementation and enforcement of Senate Bill 17. So, members, if you could be prepared with your staff to return at 11 o'clock. We're going to take a break for certain efficiencies, and with that, the Senate Subcommittee on Higher Education will stand at ease. That we're wrapping up, and we'll resume the hearing. Back to all those in attendance, thank you for your patience as we shift gears into the next segment of our agenda, which is compliance with Senate Bill 17, our ban on DEI on public university campuses. Before we get into the next charge, I'd like to reiterate some housekeeping measures. All members of the public that are here to testify, please be sure and register at the kiosk outside the hearing room, and registering for testimony will close at 3 p.m. today. If providing written testimony, if you can, please provide 15 copies with your name on it to our committee staff up here in front of the dais. There's an overflow room in E1036, which is the Senate Finance Committee room right across the hall. Public testimony will take place at the end of the hearing and will be limited to 2 minutes per person. All public witnesses are expected to be respectful and timely in their remarks. And if anyone fails to follow the rules, we will ask them to leave. It is very important to the committee, all Texans that are present, that are here taking time away from school or work or their busy lives, to have their chance to testify uninterrupted, and outbursts will not be tolerated. Members, before the break, we discussed how a small group of individuals over the past couple of weeks believed that they could control our college campuses and force the entire institution to bend to their demands. Across the nation and here in Texas, we saw protesters demanding that our universities divest from Israel, threatening violence, occupation, and vandalism. This was not the first time our universities have faced a small group of extremists enforcing a certain agenda. Following the protest in 2020 and 2021, a loud group of faculty sought to transform our campuses, demanding buildings be renamed, curriculum meet their political ideology, statues be removed, and at UT Austin, students even demanded the Eyes of Texas be replaced as the school fight song, asking for millions of dollars for it to remain. These ultimatums escalated, creating significant rifts on campus, targeting anyone who disagreed, and many changes were demanded, aiming to reshape the university into an institution focused on social justice and equality of outcome. This was when DEI bureaucracies grew out of control, replacing merit with equity for some. The success of the small groups who pushed these changes cannot be understated. Critics of Senate Bill 17 suggested it was an overreaction, claiming DEI was not a big deal in the university system. However, we've seen the truth in the evidence that shows that DEI was widespread from UTMB to the Aggie Corps of Cadets to some of the smaller institutions across the state and our community colleges. At UT Austin, merit increases or promotions required demonstration of contributions to DEI initiatives. At A&M, Asian Americans were excluded from a faculty fellowship opportunity as they were not considered underrepresented minorities. And at Tech, a job applicant was penalized for stating that he didn't believe DEI was an issue because he represents his students and treats them all equally. If it weren't for Senate Bill 17, DEI programs would have continued to grow in cost and scope, with each department publishing reports and strategic plans to create new programs and spend even more taxpayer funds. DEI ideology mirrors old Marxist talking points, dividing the world into oppressed and the oppressors. DEI advocates believe group characteristics such as race, sex, and nationality define someone's privilege. As a reminder, DEI training at the University of Houston taught that privilege gives power over other identity groups and listed, quote, having never been called a terrorist, end quote, as a privilege. The training even described religious privilege. Given this context, it's no surprise that a small group of students and faculty felt they could take over campuses to spread this radical ideology, and they feel comfortable occupying campuses to propagate the view, for example, over the last week and a half, that Israel and the Jewish community are privileged oppressors colonizing helpless Palestinians. In the past, these groups got what they wanted by shouting loud enough, leading universities to allocate tens of millions of dollars, reshaping hiring and promotions, and establishing hundreds of committees and DEI offices to please them. In Texas, we can do more to increase the number of African American, Hispanic, and underrepresented groups in higher education, and that all starts in our K through 12 schools in the commitment we show as a legislature to advancing efforts in K through 12, where many students are performing below grade level and do not have the confidence to pursue a higher education experience, nor do they feel like they can afford it. We can make our institutions of higher education reflect the diversity of our state and improve. No amount of DEI trainings that are mandatory, workshops, or political oaths that have to be signed in order to apply for a job will open up opportunities for underserved students in Texas. And we saw that as under 10 years of DEI, minority faculty recruitment and hiring numbers went backwards under DEI programs, actually diminished. Every dollar spent on bloated university bureaucracy should be redeployed to ensure that all Texas students, regardless of race, are college ready and heavily recruited for those that want to apply to a college, but again, just may not have the confidence or understand that road could be customized and tailored and supported, especially for them. Members, I know this is an emotional topic. Many of us feel strongly about the DEI legislation, and that's what this hearing is all about, is to hear the viewpoints of all Texans and to hear from our academic institutions to understand what this landscape will look like going forward as the will of the Texas legislature and with signatures from the governor on the legislation itself, spoken loud and clear that we need a different direction. We've invited several panels here remaining on the agenda, so please keep your comments brief and on topic. And I would now like to invite each of you to provide any remarks before we proceed. Senator West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
As a senator here for the past 30 years, I've witnessed many, I guess you could say, rounds we've had with the issue of DEI. To frame DEI just based on race alone is, I think, is wrong. The fact is that DEI, as I understand it, it not only deals with issues of race and gender, but geographic location, veteran status, disability status, et cetera, et cetera. But what we attempt to do is to continue to, I guess you could say, put race out as the dominant reason that we have DEI, and it's not. And when you sit up and say that we're trying to divide people based on race and gender, that's been done throughout the history of this country, race and gender. So that's disingenuous. And so when you begin to look at this, when we look at this DEI issue, obviously the chancellors have to comply with the law of the state of Texas. And the fact of the matter is, when people complain about this particular law, it's their fault. If indeed there was a different mix of people that were elected in the state of Texas, we wouldn't be here today. When you sit up and say over the past 10 years that the numbers have gone backwards, well, it's, in part, they may have, and I haven't looked at it, but the fact is this, they hadn't gone forward either. When you begin to look at, again, the number of students from geographical locations within the state of Texas, women numbers have gone up, gender numbers have gone up, LGBTQ numbers, some have gone up. African Americans numbers have not gone up appreciably. So the question is what are we doing wrong? What have we done wrong over the last 10, 20 years that I know that I've been fighting this battle? I know Senator Menendez and some of my colleagues on the Republican side have been fighting this battle also. How do we get to a point in this country, in this state, where race is not the controlling factor in terms of whether or not a student is going to be successful? How do we get to a point where zip code isn't a controlling factor in terms of whether students get to a point? I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I've got some great students, athletes, going to Texas and A&M and other institutions. Are their GPAs the same as other students? I've said over and over again, I'll trade you a linebacker for a scholarship for a student who wants to be an engineer. And for some reason, I haven't been able to get that deal done, okay? Hopefully we can. So as we have this discussion, let's be honest about where we are as a state. Let's be honest about how we can get past issues of race. And I know that's what you want to do. That's exactly what I want to do, but I want to make certain that we don't go backwards. I'm hoping that what we will see is a scorecard. We need to look at pre-Senate Bill 17 and post-Senate Bill 17 to see exactly where we are as institutions. That will help us with writing history as it relates to the impact of this particular bill. I'm hoping that it won't be disastrous, but I'm also, how should I say, aware of where we've been, and I'm hopeful of where we can go as it relates to changing the dynamics of the use of race in the state. But the reality is we've got to make certain that all students, regardless of the color of skin and their zip code, get the opportunities to be successful.
Thank you, Senator West, for your comments and your leadership through many years in the higher education space and certainly in the budget related to education strategies. And we're going to hear from, some of the finest university systems in the world today that are positioned right here in Texas. And we're going to hear about the diversity that's incredible across all of their campuses. And we're going to ask questions about not just compliance with Senate Bill 17, but what steps we can take forward on redeploying those funds that were used under DEI in ways that I think you and I both together would appreciate. So,
And I appreciate that.
yes, sir.
But we got to make sure we have mechanisms to hold them accountable.
That's right.
Okay?
That's right.
All right.
That's right. Part of those mechanisms for accountability will be their testimony here today and the monitoring of these bills and other bills coming forward through the interim. And we'll have those conversations together with our very capable dais and our education committee at large, right? So I appreciate all comments from our members and participation. And Senator Menendez, I know you have some comments as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Recognize.
I really appreciate that. You know, as we all know, the demographics of Texas are changing rapidly, and my understanding is we're now a minority-majority state in population. 5.5 million kids in our public school system. My concern is that as we move away, or as Senate Bill 17 has in essence killed diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in our higher education, is how do we help those first-generation students, those low-income students, those students whose families don't have a history of going to college, that maybe need the help of the FAFSA form or help the application in general. There are a lot of students, young people in our state that need a little help just to get to the playing field. Because all we want is a fair, level playing field. We just need a fair shot. But sometimes we need directions to where the game is. And some folks, because their families have been in the game for a long time, they know where the stadium is. They know how to get there. And it's some of our families that just don't. And some of the schools that need a little more help getting those people to understand it's okay. You can go from the Valley to UT. You can go from the Valley to A&M. You don't have to just stay at UTSA or A&M Kingsville. You can go to the big Tier 1. So I hope, and I join my colleague, Senator West, in that we measure what the net effect. And I hope we also measure the impact that doing away with something that is federally recognized and required in many grants has on our research dollars in Texas. I'm concerned. I spoke with an engineer in San Antonio who was telling me that he's applying for a grant, and the federal grant requires, what are your DEI initiatives? Doesn't know how to respond. So I'm very concerned that I've heard your goals, and I would love the day that we don't have to worry about anybody's race or background or anything like that. But I just think that for far too long, it's interesting. There's a cartoon of three kids trying to watch a ball game. And you know, one of them's very tall and can see over the fence. One's about medium height and only needs one block to stand on, and one's super short, but he needs two. And equity means that the little guy gets 2 blocks, and the medium guy, he only needs 1, and then all 3 can see over the fence. And hopefully we get to the day of justice when we can tear down the damn fence, and everybody can see the game. But we're not there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, members, thank you, Senator Menendez. Members, any other comments before we get to our first panel? At this time, the chair will call Chancellor J.B. Milliken from the University of Texas System, Daniel Sharphorn, General Counsel at the University of Texas System, Chancellor John Sharp of Texas A&M University, and Ray Bonilla, General Counsel of Texas A&M University System. We appreciate y'all being here for us today to address the Senate Committee